Any health-related information on the following show provides general information only. Content presented on any show, by any host, or by any guest should not be substituted for a doctor's advice. Always consult your physician before you begin any new diet, exercise, or training program. And thank you for listening to the Whole Care Network.
Welcome to Hospital Warrior, Advocates and Experts, the place to listen for information, ideas, and advice on healthcare advocacy in today's complex medical world. Whether you are the champion for someone you love or want to be your own best advocate, you need facts, guidance, and support. This is the place for you. Now, here's Bonnie Friedman, author of Hospital Warrior, How to Get the Best Care for Your Loved One, and host of the show.
Hi, I'm Bonnie Friedman, host of Advocates and Experts, and I'm delighted to have you with us today. My book, Hospital Warrior, focuses on the needs of hospital patients, but this podcast explores what advocates need and delivers experts who can help provide it. I'm happy to welcome you and hope you'll find this conversation interesting and insightful. And I also hope you'll become part of the conversation on social media. Today we're going to talk about what I call Advocacy 2.0. This is advocacy that goes beyond the basics and gets into some of the more involved aspects of making sure a loved one gets the best care in the hospital. So what's going on? Why are we talking about this? Well, to start, the patient's not likely to have his or her own personal physician involved in overall care in the hospital setting. The doctor may not even know the patient's in the hospital. Instead, there's usually a hospitalist, a doctor who works for the hospital, who manages patient care, but doesn't necessarily know the individual patient. On top of all that, doctors don't always communicate well with one another. What passes for communication may be notes left to one another in a file. Nurses are sometimes left out of the loop, and information that's in the patient's file is not always up to date or sometimes not even accurate. Things can fall between the cracks, get confused, or just plain go off the rails very quickly. One way or another, a family member may step up to become not just the advocate or the caregiver, but the de facto manager for the patient, the one who connects all the dots and makes sure everyone is on the same page. With me today to talk about all that is Nancy Elisburg, a friend of mine for many years. And over those years, we've shared the ups and downs of life, the good, the bad, and the medical. One of the things we've talked about a lot is how complicated hospital care has become. We both have husbands who have had multiple hospitalizations and sometimes serious complications. And we've both found ourselves in the role of case manager more than once. Now, I'd like to note, both our husbands are doing well now, so I think we're doing something right. Nancy has a varied background as a teacher, an administrative assistant, a full-time mom, and a volunteer. But perhaps most importantly, she likes to point out that she has a PhD in common sense. So, Dr. Nancy, welcome to Advocates and Experts. I'm delighted to have you join us.
Glad to be here. A very important conversation to have.
Let's jump in. You have said that being prepared and thorough is one of the most important points in being a strong advocate and a case manager. I'd like to ask you to elaborate on that a bit. What do you mean about being prepared and thorough to start? What does that entail?
Well, the best example I can give is the recent surgery where at pre-op registration we gave all of the medication. When we got into the prep for surgery, the anesthesiologist was familiar with all the current medication. However, when my husband was in the room, the nurses were not up to date. And by the time it got corrected, instead of getting his medication in the evening, it wasn't till the next morning. And so I think at each step of the way, the caregiver has to be alert enough to just double-check with everybody that everybody's files are correct.
So this really starts at the admission process. An admission may be physically at the desk in the lobby or reception area of the hospital, or it may be over the phone as a pre-op, pre-admission information gathering. But in either case, it's so important, as you're pointing out, that everything is checked and double-checked. Are all the medications right? Are all the patient's history correct? Are all the reference points accurate? And are all the details in order? And all too often, there are shortcomings in that process, as you started to experience. Now, I know you have a pretty interesting method of making sure information is presentable in a very concise way. Tell us about those cards you carry in your pocketbook and what's on them and why.
I have 3x5 cards. I keep on my computer an updated list of medications, doctors that we're using, their addresses, their telephone numbers. I use a small font. I cut and paste using packing tape to make the card look laminated, and I carry it in my purse. And so when they ask current medications, I give them the card, and usually they just make a copy of it.
Yeah, that's great. So you have information about medication and all the doctors that have been involved in care and how to get in touch with them. And it's so conveniently put together and packaged and so presentable that really helps, I think, a lot with the admission process. I have smaller pieces of paper I keep folded in my wallet with much of the same information. But if you want to be really high-tech about it, there are apps that let you put all that information on your smartphone and carry it around with you too. So one way or another, it's however you do it, it's important that you have that information for yourself and for your loved ones, so that when you get to the hospital, everything, at least on your end, is accurate and up to date. Now, you've said that it's important to check and double check that all that information is being properly routed and getting to everyone it needs to get to. What are your thoughts about that? Why have you made that a major point about your role as a case manager?
Well, I think it's very important for you as the case manager to be around when various physicians and therapists are coming in to give instructions, because the patient may be sleepy at the time, may have been given some medication where they're not quite aware of what's going on at the time, and very often will not remember an hour or two later what was said, although they will remember that the doctor was there or the therapist was there. I had an experience several years ago where we were going to need antibiotics, IV antibiotics administered at home, First the doctor said 3 times a day, then they said twice a day, then they made a point as to which pharmacy the medicine was going to be coming from, and the social worker or the person who coordinates that for the hospital saw me in the hall and said, I just want you to know I took care of everything. It's going to be 3 times a day, and I've ordered it from this pharmacy. I said, well, the doctor said twice a day, not 3 times a day, and not your pharmacy, a different pharmacy. And she basically told me that I was not part of the staff, I wasn't aware of the file, and therefore I should basically keep my mouth closed. I think it's extremely important to have the cell phone for your doctor so that if something really important comes up, you can text and get an immediate answer. I asked him if things had changed. He said, no, it's twice a day, and this other pharmacy, and so he called that woman and told her to stay away from all of his patients, and he just stepped in and took care of it.
Yeah, it's there's so many ways I want to react to that, but the first is to say that anybody and everybody in the hospital, I believe, needs to come to understand that the family is part of the care team. You're not there to be a guest for visiting hours. And to tell you directly or indirectly that you don't know what you're talking about and you should just sit back because you're not on staff is such an insult to the patient, to you, and so short-sighted. It really kind of makes my blood boil. But you got past that and you were able to follow through because you had then the next important point there, and that was a way to get in touch with the doctor directly. Not everyone gets to do that. Some doctors give out their cell phone numbers and some don't. But that was such an important part of being able to be the case manager in that situation.
Well, it was also important for me to be there early in the morning when the doctor makes rounds so that I could be a part of that discussion and take notes. And if I had come in later, I wouldn't have known what the decision was, and I would have assumed what she organized was correct. But I think it emphasizes that what some of your responsibilities are as a case manager, and also don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to call the doctor or the office. And I think you have to not abuse those calls and only use them when something serious comes up. And you have to remember that teamwork makes the difference, and you're part of the team, and you're the one who knows the patient better than anybody else.
Exactly. I couldn't have said it better myself. Being part of the team, being part of the care team is really integral to making sure that someone gets the best care, particularly in the complex situation we find ourselves in with regard to hospital care today. I remember one time I called my husband's personal care physician because I had a question about how things might go and where I might want to make some suggestion or take some action on his behalf. And the doctor didn't know he was in the hospital, wasn't happy about the situation any more than I was. And when I explained what was going on and what I thought might need to happen, he said, well, who's in charge of that case? And, I thought about it for a minute, and I said, I am. I'm the one who's connecting all the dots. I'm the one who's making sure the doctors are getting notes from one another and keeping up with the nurses and ensuring that everybody's on the same page. I'm the one in charge. And I felt a little silly saying it at the time, but over the years I've come to believe that yes, as a involved caregiving loved one, you sometimes really are the person in charge of the case. Now, you said, Nancy, you like to take notes and make sure you carry everything with you. And different people organize their notebooks different ways. Do you have any special system you use for how you make sure everything that you're getting down on paper is accessible in an organized way?
Well, I think the first thing to remember is usually different issues come up, and so each doctor or specialist comes in and takes care of his body or her body part. And I keep notes by the doctor, by the body part, and try and make sure that everybody knows what everybody else is doing to make sure that there's no conflict. And I usually, like you just said with your primary care physician, who wasn't in the hospital on the case, but knew you well enough so that you could discuss everything with him, I think you need somebody like that as well. And so depending upon the reason that your loved one is in the hospital, sometimes it's one of the specialists who could be the one that you lean on to make sure that everything is being taken care of. But I think the other thing to really keep in mind, since you know this person best, you know their personality, you know which things will set them off to scare them the most and how to get around it. And I think there are times when you have to be willing and able to step in and kind of keep things going smoothly so that eventually you can get out of the hospital.
Yes, that's really an important point, because especially when someone's sick, they're weak, they may be a little groggy from medicine, they may be a little short-tempered just because they feel so bad. And so you want to make sure that that interaction between doctor and patient is smooth and it's going, like you said, in the right direction so the patient can get out. And sometimes that means getting the doctor alone in the hall and having a private word, or a phone call to make sure the doctor understands that there are certain things that maybe don't have to all be said at once, or certain things that can be presented in a better way that will help the patient. Because after all, that's what it's all about. It's how do you as a team work together to best help the patient.
I think there's another piece to this is most doctors today, internists, general practitioners, do not have privileges at our hospital. And so that's how the hospitalist became created. If your doctor is not on the list of having privileges at that hospital, I would suggest asking your doctor who you should use when you know that you're going to have surgery or such at a specific hospital. Because most of them know doctors at different places from different situations. And if they can recommend one of the doctors who has privileges there, and you make a connection with them in the first place, that will also make things a lot easier for everybody.
That's a great idea. Get that recommendation in advance if possible, and then make a special request. The other side of that I think people don't realize is you don't have to accept whatever doctor is assigned to the case. And people think in the hospital, the hospitalist is assigned, or if you need a particular specialist, one is assigned, and you have no choice in the matter. And frequently that's not true. Very often you can have a voice in that selection, or if things aren't going well with a particular doctor, you can make it clear that you want a different doctor assigned to the patient's case. And I say that not lightly, because you don't ever want to abuse that kind of privilege or request. You don't do it for any little thing you don't want or care for. But if there's a pattern of problems that are not just not adding up, and the patient isn't getting the care from the doctor you think that should be provided, you do have a right to request someone else on the case. So that idea of getting the selection or the recommendation for a selection up front is a great one, because then you most likely can avoid a lot of potential problems down the line.
Well, that's an excellent recommendation, because that's exactly what we had to do this last time around. We did not have a doctor who we knew, the hospitalist, and we did not really make a connection. And when a problem arose, and we were told that the hospitalist was going to be in charge of it, we said absolutely not. We asked for somebody else to be the hospitalist, and we also insisted that they get a specialist to deal with the new problem. And I have to tell you that the nurses were extremely welcoming to what we were asking.
The nurses are, I think, the unsung heroes and sheroes of the hospital, and all too often they get kind of shunted aside into a sort of second place position, but I really think they should be front and center along with the doctors, together with the patient and family. And really good hospitals do that, but sometimes it doesn't happen. Sometimes the nurses are not really being put to their full advantage. And so anytime you as a family member can elevate the nurse in the role and make sure that the nurse is involved and has some say, you are doing not just the nurse a favor, you're doing your patient a favor. One of the ways you can do that is to make sure that the patient's nurse is present for rounds when they come to bedside. And again, some hospitals do it, but some don't. You can say, I want the nurse there, and it's important, and I'm going to go get the nurse if you haven't already called for that person to join us. You can also, like you said, bring the patient into the conversation when there are decisions that you want some input or advice, or if you just want things explained better. Sometimes the nurses will take more time in explaining things to you. So the role of the nurse, I think, just can't be overstated. And then I think you hit on something else there, Nancy, which is to get another doctor brought in, or to get a second opinion or consult. That's really something people sometimes feel hesitant about, like, oh, I don't want to hurt the doctor's feelings by asking for another opinion. But obviously, you want what's best for the patient, and asking for that opinion when it's warranted is a very good, positive thing to do.
Well, I think if the doctors become insulted that you're asking for a second opinion, you don't need that doctor.
Good point. Good point. I think that second opinions and consults, along with other proactive steps you can take, all work together to make sure that you're doing everything you possibly can to get the best care for your loved one, and not being shy about it. Not being afraid, like you said, to hurt someone's feelings, but in a professional way, stepping up and doing what you need to do. Now, we're starting to run out of time, but I want to make sure you get in any last points you want to make about this role of case managing and why it is so critical.
I think I would add to the conversation and discussion that while you're part of the team, you cannot be overbearing and order everybody around. Mm-hmm. I think you have to be careful which things you ask for, which things you demand, which things you question, how you question it, so that you're not seen as somebody who is obstructing the care, but more just part of the team. And if it's handled right, it works.
That's so true. I always say you have to be professional about it, and you have to treat the medical professionals the way you want to be treated, which is with courtesy and respect. And if you treat them that way, it does work. You're so right about that. Doctors and nurses are people too, and that sounds trite, but it is really a point. If you speak to them in a diplomatic way, they will respond in kind. And if you show that you're sincere and you want to make a difference, they will respect that in you too. So it is a two-way street, and you've had the results to prove it.
Absolutely.
Well, Nancy, thank you for being on the show today. I think we've scratched the surface of a very deep but very important conversation about how important it is to be involved directly as part of the team and make sure your loved one gets the best possible care. Nancy Elisburg has experience to prove it works, and I'm delighted to call her a friend and delighted to have had her on the show with us today. And thanks to all of you for joining our conversation about advocates and experts on the Whole Care Network. Until next time, stay healthy, be safe, and please take good care of yourself.
You have been listening to Hospital Warrior, Advocates and Experts, hosted by Bonnie Friedman. You can follow Bonnie on Facebook or Twitter, or contact her with an idea for an upcoming show by going to her website, www.hospitalwarrior.com. Hospital Warrior is all one word. You can also access her podcast there and on the Whole Care Network.
Any health